hot, very hot. Here in North Carolina, it's like 95 degrees. Really difficult keeping the grass green. But I suppose it's a real first world problem. But at any rate, there were two um, Joe Rogan guests or episodes, I should say, that I just kind of sat through and pulled up two clips I thought were um, relevant. Uh, the first one is Kevin O'Leary talking about data centers, and the other one is Eric Weinstein talking about Jeffrey Epstein. Um, but to start, the the Kevin O'Leary one is interesting uh, because I just do not understand the pushback um, on data centers. Well, I guess I shouldn't say I don't understand. I should just say the pushback that is being talked about more is just kind of, I don't know. It's just kind of missing the broader point. So I'll talk about it in like kind of a couple different areas. So just one, if you're taking a 10,000 foot view, um, data centers have been around for a long time, and nobody has complained about them. I grew up in Northern Virginia, specifically born and raised in Herndon before moving to Sterling. So that's Fairfax County, right next to Dulles Airport, to Loudoun County, right next to Dulles Airport. That corridor there between the toll road and 28, um, there are a ton of data centers. These data centers popped up at the kind of emergence of the original dot-com boom, but it wasn't really about supporting dot-com necessarily. It was more supporting telephony and internet at the time. So like you had DSL. Well, first of all, you had dial-up, which is going to age me a bit, but you had dial-up, and then that transformed into DSL, and then there was also like T1 services, which were brought into companies, so they could have bandwidth to be on the internet and do stuff, right? And then there was also the emergence of IP telephony. So these are IP-based phones as opposed to having traditional phones, at a Verizon co-location or something like that. But this started to pop up, and you had this massive boom of data center builds within the Northern Virginia area, and Virginia in general, but most of it was centered on the internet hub of the Northeast, which was Northern Virginia. And so you just had this explosion, essentially, of data centers. Nobody was talking about power consumption. Nobody was talking about cooling, water usage and all this stuff. Just wasn't something that was ever talked about because I don't think there was a media campaign that was pushing this particular narrative. You continue to see this mass explosion going into right where the dot-com bubble burst, which is like between 2000 and 2006. At its peak, so in Northern Virginia, we had, there was MCI WorldCom, which then became Verizon. But MCI WorldCom was so large, it employed roughly 5% of the people that lived within Loudoun County. I mean, it was massive. Like it's a massive facility. It's still there today. There's AOL, and there was a bunch of other ones that were out there. Dot-com bubble bursts. Now they've got an oversupply of data centers. So then, there wasn't much building going on. There was just reutilization of existing data centers. So the growth generally wasn't that noticeable because data center capacity was just being filled versus new data centers being built to meet demand and capacity, right? And so like it was just kind of a different world. But there were roughly about 186 data centers in Virginia alone leading up to 2017. In Northern Virginia, there was 166. Now you can kind of fast forward to, I would say, 2024. So pre Donald Trump coming in, running, and all that stuff, like all that's happening in 2024. The election's happening in November, blah, blah, blah. Then you get to a number of roughly 300 within just Virginia alone. So there's 300 data centers in Virginia. Again, I don't remember this mass kind of hysteria on data centers at all. Nobody's talking about power. Nobody's talking about water utilization and all this other stuff. Like it just wasn't happening. Then you get to today, and I think there's like something like 500 plus or 600 data centers. But now there's this entire kind of narrative around, oh, power consumption this and water consumption that, and oh, my electric bills are skyrocketing because of no. And then if you look at the nation as a whole, up to 2025, there were around 40 or 4,000 data centers in North America, or I say in the U.S. Across the U.S. A lot of these are kind of centered around New Jersey, Northern Virginia, Arizona, New Mexico to a certain extent, Texas, Las Vegas. There's a bunch strewn across California, and other places as well. But the reason why I just find the conversation interesting is, again, because I grew up in an area that was densely populated with data centers, and I don't recall there ever being this kind of heavy pushback from the localized community on why their energy prices are going up. I could tell you, as someone who lived in New York City, energy prices were high because they utilized green energy. They didn't expand out capacity. And then when they wanted to, it just cost a fortune. And then they pushed that on all the consumers. So like what I pay here in North Carolina, being next to a nuclear power plant, is more than, I think it's like 60% less than what I paid in New York City, for instance, for the same utilization. My bills here run, I think, around 150. I'm in a 3,200 square foot single family home, but it's around 150. In like, it's 95 degrees outside. The air conditioning's on all the time. Again, my bill will be around 150 to $160 for this month to cool this 3,200 square foot home. When I was in New York City, the same utilization of AC during the summers there, which was brutal because I was in an old walk-up building that was built in pre-war. So it was, I think, 1905 when it was created. There was always a breeze in there. I mean, they're not efficient. They're just leaking air and energy constantly. My bills there would be between, in peak summer, like right now, they would be, actually, it's not even summer, but the same conditions, 95 degrees for days on end, they would be anywhere between 400 to 800. And they got more expensive as I was leaving New York City, just because energy costs in general were going up because of legislation and bad policy, not because data centers were sucking up excess energy. But I will say this, like, if people wanted to have more of a, I would say, a constructive conversation around data centers, I think there is one to be had. For instance, if people are concerned around energy consumption, which for data centers is roughly about 50 to 60% of all of the energy that's coming in is going to compute, like 30 to 40% of the energy is going to cooling. Like, if they want to have the conversation, then there should be two things that are required, right? Like that you should be talked about is one is the perfect scenario, which is energy expansion using nuclear across the country, which is going to lower energy costs. It is the best renewable out there. It doesn't require having to get coal from Pennsylvania or West Virginia or any other place. It's super clean. It's super safe. It's super cheap to maintain that versus a coal or natural gas fired power plant. So the conversation should be that's the best case scenario is maybe the federal government needs to create a push on nuclear energy production across the U.S. the same way we did for the interstate highway system, right? Like this is kind of a big deal, just generally speaking. In order for us to keep up with growing energy demands in general, to be able to fuel our economy, the cheapest way to do that is not solar, it's not wind, it is nuclear. That is a conversation worth having. Maybe the federal government can step in to create incentives for either micro plants to be created or for full scale plants like we have here in North Carolina to be created. There's that level. The other is maybe it's on these larger data centers, say like AI specific data centers, which are different, definitely than traditional data centers. But at any rate, data centers like these companies should or could be creating their own power on site. And again, this can be done through micronuclear, or it could be done via nat gas. But I mean, they all of these places have nat gas turbines to click on as soon as the power goes off. Like they're on site. This is how they offer 5 nines, 6 nines, 9 nines of uptime at these places. Is that they have this kind of redundant system already in there. So maybe it's on them to create their own power. That I think that creates a whole, depending on the power sources in which they use, micronuclear would be awesome. But then there's going to have to be some regulations on access to facility or access to certain parts of the facility, how you secure it, where you actually like put that micronuclear site within the building. Is it offsite somewhere? Is it required to have security and all this other stuff? Like this is a broader conversation for sure. But using nat gas and coal or whatever to do many kind of power plants in the numbers in which would need to be done for all of these data centers that are popping up is probably not great for the environment. I'm not an environmentalist by any stroke of the imagination, but I can only imagine the constant burning of nat gas or coal, even if it's clean coal power plants, could potentially be detrimental. So again, I always fall back to nuclear. The other is, I think, the probably the easiest to do out of all of these, which is just to have a different utility rate for data centers that is essentially subsidizing all of the residential communities that sit around them. So you could have, like, say, a residential rate of, let's just say 6 cents per kilowatt hour. Data centers are paying, let's just say, 12 cents per kilowatt hour. That subsidy, they're obviously using more power, but it's not jacking up the rates for individuals. They're subsidizing essentially the surrounding communities. I think that is an easier conversation to be had. And the water utilization and all this other stuff, like, we're fine. Like, we're fine. You could easily put these places next to water sources. It's not like they're putting out polluted water. The water is literally running through radiators, getting chilled, and just cycling through. And so it's not that water is contaminated or anything like that. Like, there could be an easy fix to that. But I think just the power consumption seems to be the biggest thing. I mean, then there's these side conversations on like, oh, noise and this, that. Again, I grew up in Northern Virginia. There isn't a day where I was like, man, that data center is really loud. As a matter of fact, when you drive by, it's the quietest part of the commercial businesses, because you have basically a skeleton crew of people that are working there. So you don't get a lot of car traffic, which is nice. And they're all of the noise is inside the building. You've got fans, you've got this massive HVAC system and whatnot. And they're usually sitting on the roof, or on the side of the building, but you cannot hear them. Like you just can't. They're very quiet buildings, and even in Northern Virginia, again, growing up there, I didn't even know there were as many data centers as there were until I started, researching this particular topic, to talk about. But like most of the time, you wouldn't even know they're there because the tree line is just obscuring them at this point. Um, and so, like, they are kind of like boxes without windows. They don't need windows; they're more efficient without windows. But the eyesore that people are talking about and the noise, and all this, like, no, no. And if you're worried about if you're concerned about, like, the visual look of all of them, and if it's in an area where they're, just flattening essentially the land like they do for residential construction, then the requirement should be to put a dense tree line around the building, right, or around the parking lot structure, offset from the building. And so over time, it just kind of disappears into the background. But yeah, this topic is just I don't get it, and this is someone that's coming from the right side, and hearing a lot of right wing people talking about it. I'm like, they're just kind of jumping on the bandwagon. It doesn't make any sense. And I think there's a lot of opportunity here to have a better conversation instead of just saying, no, this is ridiculous. We don't want to do this anymore. Like, the other part of this is competition. Again, from the 10,000-foot view, is that the US is in competition, uh, in AI against other foreign powers. And so you can kind of look at it as a space race where, we were competing against Russia, and there is this, we need to get someone on the moon, or we need to get someone to, do a full orbit. We need someone to, go around the moon. We need someone to put boots on the ground, or actually feet on the ground, on the moon, to say we did it first, and, we lead in this technology. In this case, it's literally every other country, but more importantly, it's China. And so, in order for us to stay ahead of in this particular race, we need to still be able to put up these data centers, um, because we need the compute capacity, to ultimately stay ahead and continue to develop really great services and products off of AI. And by the way, I would say AI by itself, there's limited value there, but when you start plugging AI into other things, it becomes very powerful, whether it's coding, whether it's preparing or doing integrations between two different platforms and having it do most of the heavy lifting, which speeds up time to market with products. Um, Whether it's just as simple as doing research, for videos online, I use Grok a lot. But there's a lot of different ways in which AI can be paired with something else to provide a really good output, and kind of change our lives. And yeah, just like, when Henry Ford created the assembly line, which is, that ended, the horse and buggy days, because it drove down the costs of, getting goods and services from point A to point B. And it just, cars are something that we use now all the time, and horses are something that are, used for other things, but not to push goods and services back and forth. Now AI is kind of the same thing. It's going to create efficiencies in a lot of different areas, which will allow people to focus on other things or apply resources to other areas of the business, or it's going to be leveraged to enhance the things that they're doing. I look at sales, for instance, and Like I've got a lot of firsthand on that, but creating agents to essentially do a lot of the heavy lifting from a business development perspective, like there's a lot of ROI for a business in that. Then you have people that are focused on warm leads versus this cold lead flow, which requires a lot of man hours to actually convert and do other stuff. Um, Again, there's a lot of hype around AI. There's a lot of hype around data centers, but I just generally think it's misplaced. I mean, if you have an iPhone, if you have an Android device, all of that data is going to a data center. This video I'm creating right now is going to YouTube, or it's going to X, which all reside in data centers. Literally everything we do resides in data centers. So the push to slow down data centers means that now if the US becomes prohibitive to have data centers in, and you can't expand out, you start to lose capacity. You need to start looking at places, other countries in which are a little more open, maybe Canada, maybe Mexico. Now, the question is, do you want your data residing in a different country? And does the US as a nation want its data residing in another country? I would say no, as someone who's worked in data security for a long time, as well as storage. Not the greatest thing. And so all of this other stuff that we've been using data centers for, whether it's AWS, whether it's Microsoft Azure, whether it's Google GCP, whether it's Meta, whether it's any of these other platforms that are out there, like we need to continue to expand. Data is not getting deleted, it's only expanding. And so we need to have data centers in order to expand that data. There is a conversation around data compression within storage devices, and the ability to get more storage in a smaller footprint. That is happening over time at any rate. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about that. I mean, I think it's an interesting topic, but it's just kind of missed heavily in the broader kind of ecosystem. But the other is Eric Weinstein on Joe Rogan talking about Jeffrey Epstein. And if you haven't watched it, you should. You should watch either one of these videos. I think they give you a different perspective. But for the longest time, and I talked about this in my conspiracies versus conspiracy theories video, the Epstein stuff is interesting to me to the extent that it is just most about rumor and speculation and literal conspiracy theories versus actual hard evidence of anything. There is abundant evidence in one direction, which is around the question of, how did he get his money? He had all of these wealthy connections. He was, looking to connect with people at MIT and these different research facilities. Now, if you take a step back and look at, the two different stories, one is, or actually there's three, one of them may overlap. But he was an intelligence asset of Israel, or whatever government, the UK. That's one. The other is he was a money guy with connections to other people and was essentially moving money for wealthy people and making investments in things that other people don't have access to. And so he had the connections. And then the other is that he ran a global pedophile or global child trafficking ring, and he was a pedophile. There is little evidence to the latter. There's a lot of innuendo and speculation, but there's, I would say, more evidence for the first two. His connections with the Israeli government, his connections with the U.S. government, his connections with the Saudi officials, his connection with UK officials, like that is all well documented. Now, to the extent of was it intelligence or was it something else, I think it was more of the something else. And the reason why is because it seems to align better that, or I guess it seems to be more aligned like with a typical sales guy, who is one, entertaining clients, uh, getting drugs, getting prostitutes. Um, these are things that are typically done in sales. I've seen it firsthand myself. I never acquired drugs or prostitutes, but there's a reason why companies have an expense policy around not going to strip clubs. There, all of this stuff that he was doing to me rings true of a guy who was trying to ingratiate himself with people that were connected in different ways. One is wealthy people getting access to their money to make investments to sell his services. And so within that there is him trying to wine and dine clients and getting grape juice or pizza, which I would refer to as prostitutes and or drugs, or different kinds of drugs. It's more likely that that's the case. And then on the other hand, he's wining and dining with all of these scientific folks, right? And so if you look at it, he's trying to stay. This is my assumption, is he is staying on the bleeding edge of technology, looking for ways in which he can then take clients' money or his own and then fund these different endeavors, which in some cases are funded by the U.S. government, which is interesting in itself. Because when you have new technology, you can leverage government funding to then essentially subsidize that while you're building it out. And so I see a lot more of that in Epstein than I do anything else. I think the child sex trafficking ring is a red herring, the same way that Eric Weinstein talks about. I think it was used as a way to not child sex trafficking, but just trafficking the same way that Diddy got found guilty for basically the exact same thing, which is trafficking women to himself, women and men. But I find it interesting. Again, the Epstein stuff is an annoying topic in general, because I think it distracts from Trump's broader agenda. And the only reason that Democrats talk about Epstein is in relation to Trump, who, again, if Democrats had anything on Trump, they would have used it in 2016. They would have used it in 2020. They would have used it in 2024 and lead up to the election. Nothing. And then what's come out since is nothing. There's a lot of people that are connected to Jeffrey Epstein that are in places of power. That makes a lot of sense. But it's not in regard to child sex trafficking. These people are looking to make investments. They know people who are connected. The community is pretty small of these uber wealthy people. It all makes sense as to why they're kind of in the same pot together. But at any rate, let me know what you think in the comments below. These are just two things I was thinking about, today, and happened to see both of these episodes. But again, let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, share, subscribe if you want to hear more of this, and keep believing that the best for America is still ahead. Peace out.